That's an interesting one because as a chartered financial planner, you'd probably expect me to say that the conversations we should have about retirement or whatever the next chapter of our lives are should be about the money. But I don't believe they should be. I actually believe the transition to retirement or what happens next is actually way more nuanced than that. But here's the thing. The challenge we've got is money is a important point and a defining factor because money gives us, as a tool, gives us the freedom to actually do the things we want in the next chapter of our lives. So in this video, I'd like to share with you the insights that we've shared on what happens next, specifically about money, so that you can get that foundational piece of the puzzle in place to live the life you want. Welcome to What Happens Next. The interesting thing for me when we started producing videos for What Happens Next is you'd expect all of these videos to be about money because as a chartered financial planner, that's where my 2 decades of expertise is. Helping people navigate the complexities of money, work out how much is enough, and build a financial plan to give them clarity to live the lives they want. The challenge I face, and part of the reason this channel exists in the first place, is we know that the challenges we face in our 60s, 70s and beyond are more than the money. But money does play a part. And actually, lack of money and lack of financial knowledge, understanding and clarity can create a lot of worry in our lives, particularly when we're moving from an environment where we're probably working and earning an income, potentially to an environment where we're not anymore. So this compilation video gives me an opportunity to share some ideas that are really going to help you navigate financially into the next chapter of your life. The first video I'm going to share is how to work out what enough looks like for you in 3 easy steps. Roll the tape. I love being a financial planner. I'm really lucky that I get to really enjoy my job. And I'm sure my dad assumes that I'm spending all day in front of screens and looking at technical looking graphs. I'm sure my friends assume that I'm out meeting and greeting people all day. But the reality is the life of a chartered financial planner is pretty diverse. Because not only do we do the elements of technical analysis, but we also get to understand about people's lives and the role money plays in their lives. So who am I? My name's Chris. I'm lucky enough to be a chartered financial planner and run my own chartered financial planning practice. And I've done that now for over 15 years. And actually, what I love to do is getting people to a point where they understand the amount of money they need to make sure that they can live the lives they want. That is true financial independence. Under that understanding how much you've got, whether it's enough to live the life you want for the remainder of your life. And today, I want to talk about the 3 clear steps you can take immediately without the help of somebody like me to get closer to understanding what financial independence means to you and to start working your way there, or to find out you're already there and then to be empowered with that information and say, you know what, I can live the life I want to today. So I'm going to talk about those 3 steps. But before I move on to the 3 steps, I'd like to ask a favour. We're on a mission with What Happens Next to help people navigate the next steps of their lives successfully. And that's through all of the content on the What Happens Next website, through this YouTube channel, through the podcasts we run. What we want to do is help people, primarily in their 50s and 60s, navigate that next stage of their lives, be it retirement or whatever's next, in as successful way as possible. And the easiest way for you to help for free and today is like this video and subscribe to our channel. It allows us then to do a lot more good quality content, encourages us to make sure that the guests we invite onto the channel are adding as much value as possible, and allows us to continue to grow the channel. But I want to add value today. So without further ado, let's talk about the 3 steps. And in particular, keep an eye out for the mistake most people make in number 2 so you can avoid it. So number 1 is understand what enough looks like for you. The first step towards understanding financial independence is to work out your enough. And enough is the amount of money you need to make sure you'll never run out again. Now, often when I'm working with clients, I'll ask that question and clients will come back and say, I don't know how much is enough. Because how much is enough is too broad a question. So let me ask you a really specific question so that you can get to your number of financial independence, so how much enough means for you. If you never needed to do a shred of paperwork again, how much income would you want to live the life you truly desire every year? And the interesting thing is, a lot of the responses I get are, I don't know, what does everybody else choose? And the reality is that your number that represents enough will be unique to you. Now, there's a really easy way of working out your number of financial independence. And actually, we've got a free gift for you in this video, a PDF that we can send you that you can get access to using the QR code below called What's Your Number? That's issued by our financial planning business, Isabello. Use your phone to take a photo of the QR code. It will take you to a page and we'll email it straight to you. The starting point to working out how much is enough is the simple budget plan. And in that document, you'll find the budget plan. But there's plenty of good budget plans online. Because what that will allow you to do is work out how much money you need for the essentials, but also work out how much money you need for travel, for things you really want to do in that next chapter of your life. And then come up with a number, which is the amount of income you're actually going to need for the life you want to lead. However, there's a couple of important factors I'd consider when you're thinking about how much is enough. Firstly, some of the expenditure you've got today may not be there in the future. Things like school fees, things like potential mortgage if your mortgage is being paid off, things like traveling to work, they're all going to be things that for that next chapter, you might want to take out of the amount you need to spend. Also, and this is the second part, you might want to add some expenses back in because elements like travel and elements like the fact that you've got more time when you're financially independent to do whatever you want might mean that you're going to be spending more money. Time is the element that you've got. So there might be additional expenses that you might want to spend if you had more time. And these need to be factored into the plan. So that'll give you, once you've worked out your budget, once you've done a budget plan, once you've taken out all of the elements that you're not going to be paying when you're financially independent, and then added all the elements back in terms of what you'd spend if you had more time, that would give you an income number. What's the next step? And this comes to step 2. It's work out what your assets are and the continuing income you've got that contributes to the plan. So you know how much you need. What you need to do now is you need to work out what income and assets you've got that are going to support you to achieve your goal. Now, there's 2 main elements of your wealth that I'd recommend you include. Firstly, there's your assets, ISAs, pension pots, property portfolios, and those values, working out those values are really important. I would look at what assets are tangible that you can draw down on, like your ISAs or money in the bank, and what you can't, which might include property. And there also might be some bits in the middle. For example, pensions pension pots you can get access to, but not until a specific age, depending on how old you are. So there's elements that you need to think about when you're thinking about financial independence. Money you can get access to immediately, money that you'd have to sell an asset to get access to, like property, and the bit in the middle. Assets you can get an access to, but actually only at a certain age. So factor all of those elements in. However, the element that I want you to include when you're thinking about your plan is the amount of continued income you're going to expect if you don't work. Now, that might include defined benefit pensions, pensions that aren't a pot of money but pay you an income for life, but also, and this is the one that most people ignore, your state pension. There are a couple who has a fully funded UK state pension, as I recall this, and we talk to £22,985 a year. And that contributes, if your income need is 50,000 a year, that contributes a significant amount to that element. And I'd certainly be looking at including that as part of your plan. Now, the good news is there's a really easy way of doing that. If you log on, if you're in the UK specifically, if you log on to the government gateway, you can do this in a pretty straightforward way. Just Google state pension estimate, and the first page that should come up is the government page that helps you work out what entitlement you've got to your state pension, whether there's any gap, what you might need to do to fill it, and the action that you can potentially take. So certainly know what you're entitled to when it comes to state pension. So step one's look at how much is enough, and we do that by looking at the budget plan, what expenses we need to remove and what expenses we need to add. Expenses we might want to remove are school fees if they're going to start, mortgage debt, things that you're not going to be paying out for forever, but will stop at a specific period of time. And the things you might want to add is all the things you want to spend money on when and if you're financially independent enough and you've got time. That's part one, and that will give you an income number. Part two is work out where assets you've got. So how much have you got in assets and how much have you got in guaranteed income that doesn't require your time swapped for money. So that's really important to do. So assets and income. So step three is work out both your income gap and your capital gap and simply take action. So let's talk about the income gap. That's the amount of income you need minus the amount of income you know you're going to get from guaranteed income sources. So let's take a really simple example. Let's say you needed £50,000 to live the life you want, and you're in a position where you know you're going to get £30,000 from guaranteed sources, defined benefit pensions, and state pensions. That leaves you a gap of £20,000. Now, the next step is to work out the capital gap. So if we took that £20,000 a year and times it by 25, that would leave you a capital gap of £500,000. And that's the amount of capital you'd need to get access to fill that gap. Now, that calculation uses a rule called the 4% rule. And there's a couple of really important things to say about this. That gives you only a broad overview. If I'm sitting down with a client, I'm using really nuanced cash flow planning software that takes into account investment growth and tax and inflation and all those sorts of things. But as a starting point, it's a really good calculation to get to understand the amount of capital you might need to help you make sure that you're never going to run out of money again. And bear in mind that regardless of whether there's a gap or not, you know, if your gap is £500,000 and you've already got there, that then gives you a choice to do what you want with your time because you've already achieved a degree of financial independence. But if you're not there yet, the thing you need to do is decide how you're going to get there. What pots are you going to save more in whilst you're still working to achieve that level of financial independence? Now, the reality is this is only a starting point. These three steps only give you the starting point. But the starting point is really important because the more clarity you've got financially, the better you can make decisions about how to live your life and what to do as the next step when you're thinking about what happens next. Now, often what tends to happen is we find ourselves in a position where we've got enough money and we need to think about how we really effectively give that to the people we love and like in a way that is planned and focused. So in this video, I talk a lot about inheritance. Why the plans for inheritance have recently changed based on the recent budget, and the steps that you need to consider and then potentially take help you plan appropriately. Roll the tape. Seneca the Stoic was pretty blunt when he said, "Putting things off is the biggest waste of life. It snatches away each day as it comes and denies us the present by promising us the future." You see, the ancient Stoics felt that waiting until later was often a risk. And whilst we live in a completely different time, there's a recent book that shares Seneca's perspective, particularly about personal finance. Die with Zero by Bill Perkins is a clarion call to spend money on life's experiences on making us happy. And it aligns a lot with Seneca's quote by urging us to live more for today than tomorrow. However, I've got my own personal opinion on this. And whilst Seneca was pretty blunt, Die with Zero, the book, talks about the nuance and the fact that actually, when it comes to spending and investing and saving, and also gifting, which we're going to talk about in this video, there is an importance in making sure we've got the right balance. Spending your hard-earned wealth on things you're going to love is important, but we need to get the balance right so that uncontrolled and excessive spending doesn't leave us in the poorhouse. Ultimately, getting that balance right is vital. And while Seneca didn't talk that much about gifting while he's still alive, one of the other prominent Stoic philosophers talked about it a lot. You see, Marcus Aurelius wrote an entire treatise on gifting, highlighting the fact that we should give as we receive, cheerfully, quickly, and without hesitation. For there is no grace in the benefit that sticks to the fingers. And Epictetus had a great quote: "Never second guess an instinct to be generous, especially with friends and family." Now, before we start thinking about gifting to the people we love or a cause we believe in, I believe the first step is to work out why we're doing it. So what would be your why if you're thinking about gifting whilst you're still around? For some of my clients, it's about supporting the people they love and like and seeing the wealth they've accumulated work whilst they're still around so they can see the benefits. For some of my clients, gifting, either in money or time, is about helping causes they really believe in. And for some of my clients, gifting is about protecting their future legacy. So before we start to think about the numbers and the values of the amounts we're going to gift, what's the why? What's the reason that you think you'd really like to give today? Is it to help the people you love? Or is it to have a positive impact on the world? Or is it to protect the assets you've accumulated, the wealth you've built, and make sure they get passed down the generations? All are entirely valid reasons, but taking the time to understand why you might want to gift is the first step I'd take. Part 2 is working out you're enough. Because I'm a real advocate of kindness, gifting generously, but doing it in a way that's sustainable. But it's really important when we think about stuff to also consider our own kindness to ourselves. And we do that by making sure that before we gift, we know how much is enough, we know we've got that number, and we know that we can sustainably live and make the gift. I'm on a real mission with What Happens Next to help people in their 50s, 60s and beyond plan for the next chapter of their life. And I'd like to ask a favour. If you're getting a lot from this video, feel free to like and subscribe. But we've also got some free gifts I'd love to give you to benefit your journey into what happens next in your life. If you look at the description of the video below, you'll find 3 links. Link number 1 will take you to our What Happens Next quiz, where you can get a real understanding of how prepared you are for the next chapter of your life. Link number 2 is to the waiting list for the What Happens Next book, That's coming out early in 2026. So to be one of the first people to get access to that book, please click on the link and you can join the waiting list. And if you'd like to know what we're doing on What Happens Next on an ongoing basis so you can benefit, you can also become part of the What Happens Next inner circle and get notified pretty regularly of what we're up to. Hopefully that's useful. Let's get back to the video. Now, I did a video, it's one of our most popular videos on What Happens Next, that talks about the steps you can take to work out your own version of financial independence. I'll put a link in the comments below. But I'd suggest that if you don't know what your number is, you don't know how much is enough for you, a step to take before thinking about gifting is to just simply understand whether you've achieved enough. And that doesn't mean to say you shouldn't gift, but knowing that you've got clarity on where you are financially and how close you are to financial independence allows you to do one thing: make an informed choice. Number 3 is about the how much and how. Once you've worked out your why and you've worked out your number, your version of financial independence, you've got to decide on the answer to 2 questions. Firstly, knowing that you've got clarity on where you are when it comes to your own financial independence then allows you to work out how much you can afford to gift. And secondly, knowing your why allows you to work out your how. And when it comes down, there's a few factors to consider. Firstly, control. Is it a direct gift to the people you love, or would a trust arrangement be better? And if you're making a charitable gift, how do you make sure that the money you give has a direct positive impact? And what power and influence could you have over the money that's been used so that it's used in the right way? Secondly, it's important to consider tax. As I mentioned earlier in the video, if you're in the UK, because of the recent changes, gifting is certainly part of my clients' ongoing inheritance tax planning strategy, and you should definitely consider it for yours too. My one tip here is to plan as early as you can. If you want to make gifts to reduce inheritance tax, it might be worth speaking to a professional to help you with that, so that you can make sure that you're doing it in the most effective way possible. The reality is that normally for a gift to completely fall outside of your estate for the purposes of inheritance tax, it typically takes 7 years if that gift is what we call a potentially exempt transfer. Although the rules around inheritance tax are tricky, complex and nuanced. And that's why it's worth thinking about getting professional advice if you need to adopt a robust gifting strategy. But lastly, I want to talk about the one that never seems to get a mention. And I'd suggest that it's just as important, if not more important, than the other 2. The importance of impact. I had a client recently who wanted to give a low 6-figure sum to pay off their daughter's mortgage. I built the gift into their cash flow plan, the tool we use to ensure that clients got a really clear picture of their future and they could afford it. And it was interesting because the client said something that really resonated with me. Thanks, Chris. Being able to take the worry of debt away from my daughter is something I'm really grateful I'm able to do. Now, I like the idea of understanding your why and then working out your how, so that the money you gift can make as much impact as possible. So it's worth asking this question every time you think about gifting. How do I make the gift so it's going to make the most positive impact? Doing so allows you to ensure that not only the beneficiary of the gift is as happy as possible, but because we know from the research that giving money away makes us happy, you get the benefit from it too. So gifting when you're in your 50s, 60s, 70s and beyond is something you should certainly consider, but I'd suggest you take these 3 logical steps. Work out your why so you know where the money you gift is going to have the most impact. Work out your version of financial enough so you can understand how much you can gift, and then answer the important questions of how to gift and how much. And in this video, I want to talk about why I don't believe, from a financial perspective, the conventional retirement model is one that works anymore. In this video, I want to change some of the outdated notions of retirement and ask whether learn, earn and retire actually holds us back from living the life we want. I challenge you in this video to explore some of the alternatives, and I'd love to know what you think in the comments below. Roll the tape. Let me tell you about my Uncle Jimmy. Jimmy, like many men of his generation, went to work in a factory in a large East London-based industrial sugar manufacturer in an era when a lot of people had one employer throughout their career. Now, Jimmy started working for this employer and after a few decades had built up a really decent final salary pension. And armed with the fact that he'd stopped enjoying the work quite a while ago, he decided to retire early. Initially, Jimmy loved retirement. No early starts, complete freedom of time, less stress, then boredom set in. And Jimmy needed a daily routine. And unfortunately, that routine primarily was situated around the pub. Now, I haven't got a vendetta against pubs, by the way. I have been known to frequent a few pubs myself. However, I'm not convinced a daily visit to the pub is conducive to a good retirement. Jimmy died in his late 60s, and I've got to be really careful here because correlation isn't always causation. And these situations are always a lot more complex and nuanced than this simple short story. However, thinking about our purpose, identity, community, physical health, and all of those things which should play a part in our thinking about the next chapter of our lives, Jimmy didn't do, I believe we need to learn from. Now, whilst Jimmy was unique, his story isn't. And I've heard from loads of people who have relatives who have told me stories like this. So is the conventional model of educate, work, retire actually working for our lives, and what do we need to think about when we're thinking about our next chapter? Because we all know people who have experienced those gaps in the next chapter of their lives. The dad and granddad who have retired and since they've been retired have become more withdrawn and depressed. The mum and nan who fill their time by visiting the same 3 supermarkets every single day. I don't know about you, but that version of Groundhog Day is not one I want to live when I change my life in the next chapter. You see, I'd suggest the model of learn, earn, and then stop, whilst might have been sort of appropriate for the industrial generation, doesn't work as well today. And when I said it worked for the industrial generation, bear in mind that during that period of industrial revolution, living standards went up, there was more financial security, the factories got workers, but the reality is we do not live in that industrial generation anymore. And here's the reasons I think the model of conventional retirement simply doesn't suit us today. Let's start with one that you probably know. Most of us are living longer, healthier lives. By 2054, there's research to say that the number of centenarians, people living up to 100, will quadruple in the next 30 years. Life expectancy has gone from the early 70s in Western countries, and primarily that's America and the UK, to the early to mid 80s in the past 30 years. Many of us are living for another 10 to 15 years after our conventional retirement age, and a decent chunk of us live for another 30. So if many of us are living for at least another 10 to 15 years more than we expected, and actually many more are living for another 25 to 30 years, it's easy to see why we need to think differently about the next chapter of our lives we conventionally call retirement, as the likelihood of that being twice, 3 or 4 times longer than we expect means that we need to look at it differently. So does the fact that retirement now be a lot longer than we expect change how we view it? I'd suggest so. Not only have you got to consider and factor that into your financial plan because the money's got a lot longer, we also need to think about maintaining our other areas of well-being for a longer period of time too. Which moves me on to my second point. A lot of people of conventional retirement age are choosing to continue to work. Now, that's not always for the money, but it might be for a combination of the money and the mental stimulation, social connection, and sense of contribution. Things work can provide to us which are all beyond the paycheck. A lot of the clients I work with have decided that work provides non-financial benefits to their lives, which often means they choose to continue. And they're probably right to do so. Cognitive decline and social isolation have negative factors on our lives, and sometimes these holes can be filled by continued work. Having that social connection at work and actively being intellectually engaged and using your brain every day can fill some of those gaps. So you may have reached an age where people conventionally retire, but you want all of the other benefits work provides, including a feeling where you're continuing to contribute to the world and using your brain. We talk quite a bit on What Happens Next about looking at well-being from a holistic perspective. I suppose my question is, does continued work in whatever way works for you contribute to that holistic well-being for you? Now, the good news is we've got a free quiz you can do on the What Happens Next website, www.whathappensnext.life, for free right now. Now, there's a link in the comments directly to the quiz. If you're watching this on a screen and you've got your phone, feel free to click the QR code. But our aim and aspiration for you to take a quiz is it allows you to hold up a mirror to where you're strong from a well-being perspective today and the areas where you might want to do a bit of work so that you can make positive change in your own life. Let me move on to my third point. One-size-fits-all cookie-cutter retirement simply doesn't work for us anymore. We live in a completely different world than we did a few decades ago. Most of us don't have jobs for life, guaranteed final salary pensions, or even a desire to simply stop work at a particular point in time. I've talked about this before, but the cookie-cutter retirement model wasn't designed for working people. It was designed for the needs of growth for the Industrial Revolution. It was designed for the offices and the factories as opposed to the people who worked within it. And if we look at that point as bluntly as possible, retirement was designed to help older people move out of the workforce so that these industries and offices could get younger people in. Now we live in a completely different economic and cultural environment from when a conventional retirement was invented, with technology being a huge driver for this change. So for me, this means that if we're in a different economic and cultural environment in the majority of the Western world, we do need to rethink the nature of a conventional retirement. The fourth point I want to make is if you're at retirement age and you leave the workforce, society loses out on everything you can bring it and the economy, but also the people of the younger generations coming through. Society will probably benefit from your wisdom, your input, your knowledge. And if you retire, the potential contribution you can make to society, to a certain extent, might be lost. We benefit from learning so much over our decades on Earth. Lessons we can share with the next generation. Skills and knowledge we could transfer to the younger generation. Many of my clients, after officially retiring, have gone back to consult, train younger people, work as NEDs, work as charity trustees. They're all routes that you can take when you're thinking about the next chapter. I think if you're thinking about the next chapter of your life, one question I'd consider asking yourself is, what can I contribute to the next generation or the generation before that? For many of my clients, thinking about the knowledge, skills and experience they could impart to the younger generations was enough to keep them from a conventional retirement, but contributing, and this is the important bit, on their terms. My fifth and final reason why I believe a conventional retirement model might be a bit broken is that the pace of change is faster now than it's ever been, and it's making us rethink a lot in our lives. The interesting thing, I believe, about technological change, AI, and everything else changing in our lives is it does make us rethink the assumptions we use including whether a conventional retirement still works for us. We've known for thousands of years, as philosopher Heraclitus talked about, the only constant is change. The reality, however, is the pace of change has never been swifter, which means the way we look at so much of our lives is changing too. So the good news is we've got way more choice than ever before. The not so good news is choice often can be overwhelming. Thank you for joining me on this insight into financial freedom. Remember, independence, true independence, isn't just about the numbers. It's about clarity, it's about purpose, it's about physical well-being, it's about those social connections we need to maintain. But what having clarity of the numbers does give you is that foundation to actually focus on what truly matters in life. I hope this has been useful. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you soon on What Happens Next.